I'd like to ask, how many people have never heard one of my classes? Wow, that is awesome. I love new victims. New attendees. That's fantastic. All right, well, my name is Maxwell Alexander Drake. I'm an award-winning novelist. I've done everything, screenplays, musicals, TV, movies, video games, whatever. Today we're going to be talking a lot about craft. This is going to be a kind of a grammar-heavy class, not so much, but some. I will start off with my little commercial. I am teaching out of my Stronger or Better Writing Through Stronger narrative book. I do have some copies of these if anybody wants to get them. You can also get them from Amazon or whatever. I have another book that's required reading in several divisions of Disney, so people tell me it's really good, called Dynamic Story Creation. That's more on theory, on story structure. And then I have 3 copies of a fiction book that I came out while I was in cancer treatment. It's a wonderful tale if you like Finding Nemo or Monsters, Inc. It is a children's thing, but it's one of my favorite things I've ever written, and was shocking that I could actually do it while I was in cancer treatment. It was actually 1 year ago today, the day before this convention last year, I was told I had cancer. And so now I'm back, and I hopefully don't have cancer. Thank you. If you like the way I teach, drakeu.com is a great place to get some more. There isn't a lot of new stuff on, because again, cancer. But if you want to get 50% off the main package, so it's regularly $260, it's like 42 episodes of a lot of the stuff that I talk. It's kind of an overview class, and then I'm going to be doing more master classes throughout this next year. But you can get 50% off with 20Books 22 as the code. It is case sensitive, so keep in mind that books is lowercased. I do a podcast. There's about 60 hours of a podcast out there now if you like the way I kind of talk about writing. It's called Releasing Your Inner Dragon. I'm also doing a free monthly Zoom class. Really, it's a Q&A session. It's not a class. But it's the first Tuesday of every month. If you go to starvingwriterstudio.com, you can sign up for it and just join the Zoom and ask questions, and I answer them. That is on my YouTube page. I do have a YouTube page now. There's one video on it, which was last month's, well, technically this month, which was still in November. So November's Q&A is on there. It's the only thing that's on there. But it's youtube.com/DrakeU or @DrakeU, whatever it is for them. That's pretty much it. All right, let's get into this. So I start off all my classes with a quote. I love this one from Anton Chekhov. "Don't tell me the moon is shining, show me the glint of light on broken glass." Now this is technically from my Show Don't Tell class, and for some of you who have done my Show Don't Tell class, you will see some of the slides in here are from that class. But I love this quote, not only because it has the word show and tell in it, which is really nice, but my favorite thing about this is that Anton died in 1904. People have been bitching at writers to stop telling in their work for a really, 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 really long time. Matter of fact, I have this scene in my head of 2 cavemen sitting around a fire, and one of them's like, "I like your story about saber-tooth attack, but you're very telly. You should be more showy." And so the Better Writing book is a lot of that, going through and just how to be a more showy writer, how to be a more immersive writer, how to hold your audience's attention. So that's what we're going to be talking about a lot through this. Now, I'm super excited about the next brutal writing advice book that's coming out. Should be out in February if I can make it, but February, March, April, somewhere in there. It's called The Holy Book of Grammar, and it is a grammar book. I'm going to teach you grammar, but I'm going to do it in my snarky, kind of silly way, so it should be entertaining. But the thing that separates it apart from everything else, and the reason why I'm so excited about it is I don't just teach grammar. One of the first chapters I wrote was on prepositions, how to identify prepositions, what a preposition phrase is, so on and so forth. But then I talk about why it's important for a prose writer to know this, and how a prose writer should use them, and how a prose writer should not use them, and also how you can bend the rules and how you can break the rules without breaking your story. So it is the first grammar book that I know about that not only teaches grammar, but teaches it from a very specific prose standpoint of how to utilize all the different aspects of grammar to make your writing better. But that's what this is a lot of. We're going to go through quite a bit of this. Because to me, grammar is the tool of the writer. I am a surgeon. I just don't use scalpels. I use words. And so this is my tool. That's why I feel like you must know grammar. It always makes me upset when I meet a writer where they're like, "Yeah, I don't know anything about grammar. I don't want to." Because that's like a surgeon who has never studied medicine. And they're out there. They're just called serial killers. They're not actually doctors. And that's the way I feel that these writers are doing to my beautiful genre. They're just serial killers putting out books. So I'm going to start there. Let's talk about the difference between show versus tell. The basic difference between showing versus telling is that with telling, the writer is merely cataloging actions, feelings, emotions, and events. Now, I'm not a very smart dude, and this is probably the smartest thing I've ever written in my entire life, so I always read this twice. The basic difference between showing and telling is that with telling, the writer is merely cataloging actions, feelings, emotions, and events. With showing paints an image that allows the reader's imagination to create a scene and place them inside of, so that they can experience it. There is a huge difference. The Show Don't Tell class was actually my second class that I ever created. And the biggest reason I created it, back in the 20 years ago when I was on tour, I wasn't all that busy as a writer, not as I am now. And I used to tell people, well, if you want to send me a couple pages, I'll critique them for free. Don't do that now. I mean, you could pay me to do it. I do, take private clients. But the number one thing that I would get is I'd get something and I'd read it and I'd go, wow, you're very telly. You need to be more showy. And I'd send it back to them and they'd go, okay, great, that's great advice. And they would rewrite it and they'd send it back to me and I would go, so I can see you're using different words, but you're very telly, you should be more showy. And they were like, oh, yeah, you mentioned that. Okay, I'll do that. And then they rewrite it and they send it back to me and I would go, you don't know what I mean when I say be a showy writer, do you? And they go, I have no clue what you mean. And I didn't, that was an eye-opener for me because, I wrote my first book when I was 12, and a piece of it actually got published a couple years ago. I rewrote it. It was written by a 12-year-old. It was terrible. But in going back to it and rereading it, I was shocked that even though I was a horrible writer at 12, it was still fairly showy. So it took me a while to understand that it was a hard topic for a lot of other people to grasp. And so this isn't the full Show Don't Tell class, but there's pieces of it because it all ties into how to be a better writer. So let's go through some things. First of all, verbs. Verbs are literally everything in your sentence. They are the most important word of every single sentence you write. Now, this is not how you show a story, but this is where it starts. I have had weeks-long conversations with an editor over which verb to use in one sentence of a 150,000-word manuscript. Like, they're that important. So if I wrote Drake hit the wall, everybody can see that. If I wrote Drake struck the wall, you can also see that. But do you see the exact same thing, or has the image changed a little bit? What about Drake whacked the wall, or Drake bashed the wall? Every one of these say the exact same thing. That's one thing I love about being an American English prose writer, is that our language was created by stealing from every other language on the planet. Which is why there's 40 words that mean the same stupid thing, but they do evoke different emotions, different feelings. You, as the writer, need to be aware of this. Every verb is important. Now, gone are the days where the writer is trying to prove that they're smarter than the reader. Readers don't want that. So if you write Drake percussed the wall, while that may be technically accurate, I will put your book down. Even if you're using me as your main character, I'm not reading it. You don't want to be a thesaurus. You want to choose your verbs very, very succinctly. Again, it doesn't make you a showy writer, but it really is the foundation of where all this starts. So if we wrote, Drake put his gun in his holster, turned, and walked from the room, everybody can see that. If we change just two words, Drake slammed his gun in his holster, turned, and stormed from the room, everything changes. So pay attention to your verbs. They are vitally important, and it is the first step to being a much more immersive writer. The second is emotions. A lot of people have a hard time with emotions, and I get it. We as writers, we've slit our wrists open, we pour our blood onto the page, and it is a piece of your soul that you're getting out there, and it's hard to get critique from people. So you go to a critique group or whatever, and they'll say something really innocuous, like, hey, you author intruded in this paragraph, and that weakens this story because of this. And what you hear is, hey, this part of your soul, it sucks. And it hurts, and I get it. And so some people, for whatever reason, they hold back, but you can't. You have to pour it out there. You have to expose yourself to your readers. It's how you gain the trust and the admiration of them. So we don't want to tell our readers what the characters in our story are feeling. We want to show it to them. We want to let the reader experience the emotions. So in other words, and these are crappy examples. Every time I've been giving this class for, 15 years now, or at least this slide, because it's a part of my Show Don't Tell class. And every time I do it, I go, I'm going to change these, and I never do, because it works. So the monster jumped from the bushes, and Drake was scared. So first of all, you always can tell whether you're showing or telling if you can turn it into a math equation, I don't even know if my little light's working. If you can turn it to a math equation, there's no room for math in creative writing. I can barely speak English, but I'm worse at math. Drake equals scared. If it's a math equation, you're telling. Really easy to do that. Now, we just talked about verbs, and you can say, well, but was is a really weak verb in that sentence. What if I wrote, I'm sorry, I forgot I did change this. So let's go with a different way. Scared is a weak verb, so let's use terrified instead. Terrified is a much stronger verb than, or word, technically in this case, than scared. But it's still Drake equals terrified. And again, we could change it to felt. Drake felt terrified. It doesn't change anything. Actually, my rule with my writers is you cannot use the word feel or felt in narration, ever. You can only use it in dialogue, period. Because feel and felt are the worst tells that you can write across the board. So, how do we turn this into a show from a tell? This is where you have to think different. To change a tell into a show is very simple. You just have to ask a question. And that question differs depending on what type of tell that you're doing, and also whether it's a POV character, the narrating character, or a secondary character. But basically, you just ask a question of whatever. So like in this case, what does it feel like to feel terrified? Whatever your answer is, and there's a million different answers for that, that's the show. It's that simple. So if it was a sound, what does it sound like? If it was a whatever, you just ask the question of whatever it is, and whatever you come up with an answer is the answer. That's why I recommend every writer should have the emotional thesaurus on their desk. I don't get paid any money from this. I have it on my desk. It's fantastic. Look it up. It literally is just a book of different emotions, and then it's got different ways to describe those emotions. That's all it is. It's like an encyclopedia of emotions. So one example is we could write, the monster jumped from the bushes, the blood drained from Drake's face. Because that's one way to show terror as opposed to telling the reader that Drake is terrified. We could also write, the monster's horrifying vicious drained the blood from Drake's face and he struggled to breathe. That's another way to show, and there's a million. I mean, we can go through, I struggle to breathe, Drake struggled to breathe, my eyes bulged, Drake's eyes bulged, tremors racked my body, tremors racked Drake's body, the sensation of needles ran up my spine, Drake's throat clamped shut, a scream ripped from my lips, Drake's palms went clammy, I backed away, escape being the only thought in my head. I mean, the list goes on and on and on and on and on of the millions of ways you can describe fear. That's how we get away from telling. One way, anyway, with emotions. So keep in mind that these will be different between the narrator and the secondary character. With the narrator, you're in the head of the narrator. You're not in the head of anyone else. There is no head hopping in point of view, period, in prose. There is no POV that allows for head hopping. It's really easy to think about. Look around the room. Do you know what anyone else is thinking? No, you don't. And if you do, you're in the right city, because if you know what people are thinking, you should make a lot of money gambling and forget about this writing thing. The narrating character is you. You only know what you're thinking. You're only inside your head. So if it's a secondary character, you got to be careful. Like you can't say, bile rose in the back of secondary character's throat unless I stick my tongue down secondary character's throat and taste the bile, because I'm not going to know that. So you need to be kind of aware of that, whether it's a narrating character or a secondary character. So another thing you need to do is stay away from active versus passive voice, or know the difference between active versus passive voice. Now, this is a tricky topic, and I get that, but one of the reasons why I love English so much and why I excel so well at English is because the guys who created the rules of English were brilliant, brilliant people, and they made it very easy to understand. So here's the definition of active versus passive voice. In an active voice sentence, the subject is doing the action, and in a passive voice sentence, the target of the action gets promoted to the subject position. See? Very, very easy to understand. This is why I hate grammar and why I hate academics, because they're morons. Like, nothing's getting promoted in a sentence. I don't even know what that means. It actually isn't that hard, though. Let's go back to third grade and let's diagram. You do, as a professional writer, you must know how to diagram sentences. Now, luckily, you don't have to do all that crazy lines and jokes and circles and all that. You have to know a couple things. You absolutely need to be able to pull out your subject and your action. Period. Every sentence you write, you should be able to point to and go, that's my subject and that's my action. It'll keep you from writing horribly constructed sentences, like passive voice sentences. So let's start with a really simple sentence. The dog bit the boy. What's the subject? The dog. What's the action? Bit, right. So the subject is doing the action. So it is active because the subject is actively doing something. It's interesting to read. If we flip this around and we wrote the boy was bitten by the dog, what's the subject? The boy, what's the action? Was bitten. What did the boy do? Not jack crap. It's passive. That's it. That's how you know whether you're writing an active voice versus passive voice. I don't know about promotions or anything like that, but if the subject isn't doing the action, then you're writing in passive voice. As an American prose writer, you should write less than 2% passive voice in your entire manuscript. I write less than 0.2%. Why? Because passive voice sucks. However, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you want to use it. And so the only times I write a passive voice sentence is when the sentence requires it to be written. And what I mean by that is, if we look at that last sentence, the boy was bitten by the dog, all the information the reader needs is in that sentence. They know who was bitten, they know what the action was, the biting, and they know who did the action. So if I'm going to give that kind of information, I'm going to do it in a much more dynamic way and write it in active voice. The dog bit the boy. It's strong, it's aggressive, it's interesting, it's engaging. If I am going to write it in passive voice, it's because you can write a passive voice sentence and omit who did the action or what did the action. The boy was bitten. So if I don't want my readers to know who bit the boy, was it a dog? Was it a spider? Was it a sister? I don't know. I'm not telling you, Mr. Reader. I'm going to give you a passive voice sentence because it's a complete sentence. And not that you can't use fragmented sentences. I use fragments a lot. They are very powerful when used correctly and when used sparingly. But if I need to give information to the reader, but not all of the information, that's when I'm going to use a passive voice sentence. Other than that, why would I ever write the boy was bitten by the dog? First of all, it's a bigger word count, and being a showy writer is always going to add word count. If we go back to the example of the monster jumping in the bushes, the sentences are much longer than Drake was terrified. So you're always going to write longer when you are a showy writer, so anytime you can write less, you should try and shoot for that, because words cost money. Another thing that you should avoid if you're really going to want to, and I am skipping around a little bit, this class doesn't really have a lot of an order to it. But again, if you want more details on all this stuff, it's in the book. Another thing you want to do is avoid filtering. Now, a lot of people have never even heard this term. And it gets a little confusing because the rule is I don't want to filter the story through the narrator. But every time I say that, I also go, but you want the reader to experience the story through the narrator, so aren't you? Yes, it is. For whatever reason, the industry has used the same word for two different things. But I'm not talking about the good part of it, I'm talking about the bad part of it. So filtering has to do with what you want the reader to focus on. And that comes down to understanding why we construct the sentences the way we do. The reason why you have to understand what the subject and what the action is and understand that you want to write an active voice is so that you can avoid filtering. Because we don't want our readers looking at the boring part of the sentence while something else cool is happening. So in other words, I could feel the demon's hot breath licking the back of my neck. Now, you've probably seen a similar sentence in a billion different published books. And you're like, yeah, there's nothing wrong with that, except for it sucks. It absolutely sucks. What is the subject of this sentence? What is the action? Could feel. Is that the cool part of the sentence? No, it's not. The demon's hot breath licked the back of my neck. Now I'm forcing the reader to feel the demon's hot breath because I'm focusing on that. The action here is the demon's hot breath, or the subject is the demon's hot breath. The action is licked. We want to construct our sentences so we force the reader to feel what we want them to feel. I always say it like this. My stories are roller coaster rides, and my readers are the occupant of the roller coaster. They don't need to come with anything to my story. When I want them to laugh, they'll laugh. When I want them to cry, they'll cry. When I want them to feel terror, they will feel terror. I'm in control. You strap in, and where this roller coaster goes is where it's going to go, and you have no control over that. And how you do that is very simple. I'm going to take a little rabbit chase here because you need a little bit more information that's in this class. First of all, you have to make the reader love the character, which you have to do in the beginning of it. You set that up. Second, you have to make the reader care about what the character cares about. And then third, you brutally take away what the reader loves. And that will, like, by default, take it away from what the reader loves. And so once you can accomplish those things, and then you stay a very focused, emotional, showy writer, you become a roller coaster. And your reader is just there along for the ride. I mean, one of the things I love about my reviews, if you do read my reviews, there's a theme, there's several themes that go through them, but one is, don't read Drake if you need sleep, because you won't put the book down. Because I don't care. I don't care about my readers. I want to grab them by the nose hairs and drag them all the way through the book. And I'm not going to let them go. Because I don't want to put it down. I don't care if they've got a job interview at 6 o'clock in the morning and they didn't go to bed until 4 o'clock in the morning. That's not my problem. My problem is you putting my book down. So I want to understand this stuff so that I write a much more dynamic method. There's some flags on filtering. It's a lot of the emotional stuff. You know, feel, see, looked, wondered, all of these different things are, and the list goes on even more than that. Smelled, I mean, it's anything. You know, Drake smelled, Drake saw, Drake looked, Drake peered, Drake heard, Drake listened. All of those physical characteristics, if you start a sentence that way, you're filtering. The cool thing is usually you can just cut it. Just cut the first 2 words off and the sentence stands by itself without any other editing at all. Sometimes you might have to tweak it a little bit. But you definitely want to do that. But it goes deeper than that, because not only is it the hear and looked and all of those, but it's also words that are in here like decided or wondered or whatever. So like Drake wondered what it would feel like to fall to his death. Well, first of all, there's that feel in there, so you know it's already a crappy sentence. But what does that give the reader? How do they experience what Drake is experiencing? That's very ambiguous. That's very much, reader, do my job for me, because I'm not a good enough writer to show you what it feels like to wonder what it feels like to fall to your death. So you do my job for me. Now, what if they're not as good as me either? You know, I've just given an amateur the reins to my story. I don't want to do that. Drake's imagination ran wild, the wind rushing past him, whipping his clothing into a tangled frenzy, the sight of the ground racing up to meet him, its sole desire to crush every bone in his body, the terror and ecstasy of his last few breaths of life. Now I'm showing you what it feels like to wonder what it feels like to fall to your death. And oh, also, Drake is batshit crazy. Just a little tidbit there. I can show so much more by expanding on that instead of just doing a crappy tell and a crappy filter. Is it more work? Yes, but I'm a professional writer. You know, I don't want to watch amateurs play football. I want to watch professionals play football. I don't want an amateur working on my kidney. I want a professional working on my kidney. You know, I expect that of my authors, and I want my fans to expect me doing more work for them. So avoid filtering. Drake watched the rabbit dog creep closer. The rabbit dog crept closer. Drake looked down the hall and saw Dylan. Dylan stood in the hall. I see the knife lying on the table and pick it up. Now here's not only is this a filtering, because I see is the subject in action, and none of that is important at all, but I'm also combining some things in the story that maybe this has nothing to do with it, but let's imagine that we're writing a story where me picking up a knife is very, 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 very important to the reader. Well, instead of cramming one sentence, what if instead I wrote, the knife lies on the table? Hey, reader, see the knife lying on the table? Do you see it? Do you see the knife? I pick it up. I'm stressing things to my reader. I'm the roller coaster. I force you to do what I want you to do, not the other way around. And so not only am I cutting out the filtering, I'm stressing what I want my readers to focus on at all times. You must know your subject and your action. You must pay attention to your verbs. You must write better. It's just the way it is. Dylan wondered if he should call Drake today. You can also get away with stuff like changing it into inner monologue or dialogue. I wonder if I should call Drake today. Yes, the word wonder is still in there. But why is this better? Because anytime you're in dialogue or inner monologue, it's more active for the reader because they feel like they're actually getting information directly from the character. And so we're giving the illusion that it's more, impactful to the reader, more impactful to the story. Sometimes you want to use filtering, though. Again, with all creative writing, it's not a don't ever do it. It's a only do it when you need to do it. So let's say there's something like this. I'm sorry, Drake, But we can't be together any longer. Dylan stood. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I watched as Dylan slowly walked away, my heart screaming. I watched as the filter. But what do I want the reader looking at? Do I want him looking at Dylan walking away? Or do I want him looking at me and my suffering? Again, it's about controlling the reader's focus. I want you looking at me. Screw Dylan. He just broke my heart. Piss on him. Me. It's all about me. Look at me while I sit here. So, again, it's about control. You're in control. You're the bus driver. Everyone else is just a passenger. This is the hardest part of writing really well. And there's a whole massive section on this in here, but I'm going to steal one little piece for this. Because I think this is the part that's the hardest for writers to grasp. And that is to understand when you're writing in a limited POV, when you're writing in first person or third person limited, you're actually not writing in third person limited, by the way. I'm trying to resurrect the term third person free indirect discourse. That's actually what you're writing in. But for whatever reason, people don't like the term free indirect discourse. I guess it's kind of long. But when you're writing in a limited POV, you have nothing to do with the story. You're the monkey at the typewriter. The narrator is telling the story. So when you're describing stuff, if I'm going to describe this room with the chandeliers and all the people in the room and, whatever, it's not about describing this room for the reader. It's about describing how this room affects me to the reader. I'm the POV character. If the zombie apocalypse breaks out in here, some of you are going to die. Some of you are like tertiary characters, I'm sorry. Some of you are secondary characters. You should stick with me, though, because I am definitely the narrating character of this story. And I'm going to live. That's all I'm saying. So it's about me. It's about describing how I see this room, how I see the audience, how I feel up here on the stage. That's what the reader wants. That's how we connect them to it. That's why head hopping is such a horrible sin when it comes to writing, because there's only one person that cares about every character in your story, and that's you. The reader wants to care about the narrator. That's all they have time for. You expect them to actually care about everyone in this audience? I'm sorry, it's not going to happen. You love everyone in this audience, but the reader is never going to. They're going to care about me, because I'm the narrating character. That's what they're going to care about. So, again, it's very difficult to make this trip, and this is where it really takes years of practice to get to. But one of the hardest concepts to grasp about being a showy writer is that you must make everything in your narrative personal to the POV. Remember, if you are writing first person or third person, I've already said this, then it's your character telling the story, not you. So in other words, as I've traveled the country and traveled to different writers groups, one of the things that I hear all the time, and it kills me, is that you shouldn't write exposition. Now, I write video games, I write movies and TV. You don't write exposition in those because the camera can't see exposition. I mean, you can do a crappy voiceover, but that ruins a movie every time unless the entire movie is set around that plot device. But prose, you're inside the head of the narrating character. It's the only POV that you get that. Or it's the only medium, that you get that. Don't waste that. That is the power. Why do you think everybody says, well, the movie was good, but the book was better? The book was better because you're inside the character's head. That's why the book is better. And, you're also painting on the canvas of the reader's imagination instead of, a limited screen and budget and all that other stuff. Sure, all that comes into play. But don't shy away from exposition. So in other words, let's say we write, I stood in the backyard. It was winter, and snow covered the roof of the two-story home I'd grown up in. The pool had been drained, the trampoline placed in storage. A foot of snow sat atop my father's old covered grill. The forest surrounding the house was filled with bare branches. The place felt as empty as my soul. So what do you get from this? Obviously, you get a backyard. There's stuff in the backyard. It's winter. But what do you get about me? What do you know about me from this paragraph? What's going on in this scene? Depression. Maybe. We've got I felt, and there's that word. So you know that's a crappy sentence already. It's got the word felt. Let's make everything personal. I stood in the backyard where I'd spent my entire childhood. The pool that housed the pirate battles and sea monster attacks. The trampoline where I'd competed for Olympic gold. The surrounding forest I'd spent countless days exploring, pretending it was the deep, dark jungles of Africa. The grill my father used every summer to serve up burgers, chicken, and ribs tastier than any I'd had since leaving home. But all that were left now were the memories, cold and empty as the winter gripping the world around me. Snow covered the roof of the 2-story house, icicles lined its eave. The pool had been drained, the trampoline placed in storage. A foot of snow sat atop the covered grill. The bare branched forest now is lifeless as my soul. What do you now know about me? What do you think is going on in this story? Somebody died? Did you get somebody died from the first one? Not really. I mean, I told you I felt depressed, but do you feel the depression in this one? And I didn't write the word feel in this one, but I did in the other one, and yet you feel it in this one and you don't feel it in the one with felt. Everything in this is personal to the narrating character. This is an example. There's no story wrapped around this. But yeah, when I read this, I go, man, this guy must have left home. He probably got in a huge fight with his dad. He's never spoke to him, and now he's back for his dad's funeral, and he'll never get that closure. Oh my God, this is horribly sad and depressing. None of that's there. It's all subtext. It's all just making everything personal to the narrating character. Obviously, it has to fit in the story. If he's there for his nephew's birthday party, this is probably the wrong way to describe the backyard. Just saying. Unless, again, we could be writing a different type of story. So that takes a long time to really understand how to describe everything personal to the character. But that's what you want to do. All right. Action tags. Action tags are the bomb, in my opinion. I'm actually one of only 2 published authors that I know of that do not use speech tags at all. Speech tags are basically where you say John said because you need to let people know who said something. I don't use them at all. Not a single one. There's nothing. Actually, there's one thing I had published one time that had it, but there's a reason for it because you can't see any of the characters, and so I couldn't get away with my normal writing style. Don't do that, by the way. I said earlier you should never not do something. Well, 30 years ago when I started writing and somebody said, you should use more action tags. I said, more? I'm going to use only. And I've just done it for 30 years. But it's really hard, and it puts you in some dumb situations. And I mean, I've made a career out of it now, so I'm going to stick with it. But I'd love to write John said every once in a while. It'd be really nice. But let's look at why action tags you should use more than speech tags. If we write, Drake said, bite me, what does the Drake said do other than tell me that Drake said it? Nothing. Action tags are when you're actually just wrapping stuff in the paragraph around dialogue. Remember, everything in a paragraph is related. So it's one character's moment of time in the story saying one piece of dialogue or related dialogue or whatever, but it's all related. So you're not going to have 2 characters talking in one paragraph. So you can do a bunch of things if you get away from the John said. You can describe characters. What's not to believe? Arius's gruff voice matched his personality. He cast a glance in the direction of the farmer who remained where they'd left him. His story fills in the missing pieces, does it not? Talbot said nothing, never taking his eyes off the old farmer. Who said what's not to believe? Arius. There's no doubt about that. He also has a rough voice and a gruff personality. I worked that in there too. This is an opening of something I was writing when I was writing this class. So I'm building character descriptions without saying, Arius had a very rough personality and his voice was also very rough. Like, I don't need to do that. I can actually work it in with dialogue, and so I'm kind of drip feeding it to my readers, and it's so much more dynamic and so much more palatable for them to swallow. You can do scene setting. Yes, Arius cut his eyes to the sun well on its way to setting in the west. But if we find anything, we can't go after it this late in the day. Hey, look, I didn't say the scene was taking place in the late afternoon. I just worked it into dialogue as an action tag. In other words, Arius is doing something that shows the reader what time of day it is without me ever telling them what time of day it is. It can give insight into the POV character. Talbot turned to Latimus. Why are you still with us, Latimus? Your compulsory tour of duty ended near 3 months ago, and technically you're no longer a ranger. Not that a son of the Empire I should say ever, that's a typo in this, not in the other thing, the actual writing, has ever joined our ranks. You'd find more glory as an officer for the Legion. The question had been thrown at Latimus 100 times, pretty much every day since his time with the Rangers should have ended. I have no interest in glory. He kept his tone light, pushing away the temptation of rolling his eyes. And I feel I still have things to learn from you Rangers. So I'm giving insight into the character. He's frustrated. But I'm not saying, oh God, again? Latimus couldn't believe that he got this question for the 3,000th time. I'm not telling you he's frustrated. I'm working it in as a part of the paragraph so that A, you know that Latimus is the one that's saying this dialogue, so I don't have to write Latimus said, and B, I'm giving you that he's frustrated by this question. You can do world building. Talbot pushed aside some of the thorny vines. Like the tales of magic grapes, I figured it was all hype, and yet, when he withdrew his hand, a purple fruit twice the size of a normal grape rested between his fingers. The elf brought it to his nose and gave it a sniff. He looked at the others, shrugged, and bit the purple orb in half. Arius raised his hand. Don't, he sighed in frustration. You know, for a highly trained and skilled ranger, you can be thick as a sow sometimes. Now, I told in the second part of that, he sighed in frustration. Why? Because you don't want to do nothing but show, because it adds word count. Telling is fine if it doesn't hurt the story and it's not something massively important. And the reason why I told here is because the joke that I want the reader to laugh at is the fact that you got a ranger who's just eating random fruit that they don't know what it is, and his boss is like, what an idiot. And everybody's seen that before. So I don't want to waste a lot of time giving a huge showy description of his frustration. I'm just going to tell it real quick. So it's fine to tell sometimes. Again, it's not about only doing, it's about changing it. But we're world building what these grapes look like. So my general rule for my writers is this. If you're going to write a line of dialogue followed by a bunch of words that say something, and they also have a speech tag in it, don't use a speech tag. Just cut it. You can cut it that simply. So in other words, how you doing, Drake said as he waved to his friend coming down the hall. Why not just write, how you doing, Drake waved to his friend coming down the hall? Why do I need Drake said? It's worthless. Now, if it's only Drake said, how you doing, Drake said, great, leave it. But if you've already got other stuff in there, the said literally is worthless. You're wasting your reader's time, and it doesn't add anything. And it's so much more dynamic just to go ahead and just say what the character does. Don't use dialogue when narration can show it better. I'm so angry with you, Drake said to Dylan. People do this a lot, where this is the flip of what I said earlier, where you can use dialogue or inner monologue to show better than you can with narration. Sometimes it's the other way around. Dylan sat timidly across the table from Drake, his eyes pleading for what? Forgiveness, acceptance? Drake looked away, his jaws clenching as he glared out the window. This is so much more powerful than having the character say, I'm so angry with you. So think about that when you're writing. What is the best way to give the information to the reader? What is the best way to make them feel it? Again, I'm in Drake's head, so I can give a lot of exposition within that is going to be way more powerful than Drake just saying he's angry. So it goes both ways. You have to kind of think about that. Adverbs suck. Adverbs are always crappy, lazy writing. You can disagree with me all you want. That's fine. It's always crappy, lazy writing. A lot of times it's redundant. Keeping low, Drake quickly raced to the other side, because you can slowly race, so I need to make sure you quickly... No. There's no difference. When the plane tilted sideways, Drake was thrown completely out the open door. Man, it's good that you wrote that, because I thought Drake left his leg in the plane. No. They're just worthless words. Now, what they can be used for sometimes is writers will use them to overcompensate. Going back to the very first thing I talked about, they'll overcompensate a weak, crappy verb, or even adjective or word or whatever. So as an example, knowing the boy was exceptionally smart, well, smart is not the strongest word there, so you're using exceptionally to strengthen that word. Why don't you just write, knowing the boy was brilliant, and then you don't have to have that crappy adverb that's strengthening another word that you could just do a better word on. So it just always is. Now, again, it's not about only. I use adverbs in everything that I write. Probably once every 2 or 3 pages you'll find an adverb. Every once in a while you'll find 2 adverbs in one paragraph. Not very often, but I've been known to do it. Because again, sometimes you do want to tell. Sometimes the door just slowly closes. That's the way it is. I don't want to describe the door slowly closing. I'm just going to tell you the door just slowly closed. It's about control. It's about you, the writer, are the roller coaster. You make those decisions. You decide what you want to focus on, what you want to spend extra time on, which is the showy part of it, what you're just going to breeze through, sometimes if nothing happens and the story leaves New York and goes to Chicago, sometimes you can just write, and then they jumped on a train and went to Chicago. And you're done. Because nothing happened on the train ride. So just go and move on to Chicago where the story picks up again and we're going to have something interesting happen. You're in control. So that's it. Again, if you want the 50% off, 20Books 22 and that coupon is going to be good until I think the end of January, I think is what we put on it. So if you want it, I am going to hang around a little while. I've been under the weather. I actually feel decent today, but I've been sick for the last couple of days. So I am just going to be here for this and then I'm leaving. But if you guys do want to chat, I will be out there for as long as anybody needs me. If you want to pick up copies of the books, I'll have them out there. Other than that, thank you guys for your attention. I appreciate it.